All praise, glory, and honor is most certainly due to the Most High, the God of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, peace to him and his son. I count it to that blessing each and every time that I can come before you, preach the word of God, and count it as a light thing to do so. All right, brothers and sisters, we know it's Halloween, and usually I deal with the history of this pagan custom on this very day. One of the things that I find, and coming into the truth, I realized just how in the dark I was in regard to the customs and the traditions that I was engaged in my youth growing up in Christianity. I had no idea about Christmas and Easter and Sunday worship and even this day Halloween, and how it's all pagan, how it's all contrary to what thus saith the Lord. I never even gave it any thought, but we're going to do that today. We're going to give it a little thought today. I want to start off in Colossians. I want to start off in Colossians, the 2nd chapter and verse 16, because here Paul writes this letter this epistle to the congregation at Colossae, and it says something in this epistle concerning days. It says, verse 16, Colossians 2:16, let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of an holy day or the new moon or of the Sabbath days. Now, it's about these days, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. These days, brothers and sisters, foretell what's going to happen. They outline the plan of salvation for man. Now, these days, I've heard the ministers try to say that this was referring to holidays like Christmas and Easter. Let no man judge you in those. That's not what this is referring to. That's how you know people are trying to deceive someone. This is referring to the holy days that you see outlined in Leviticus, the 23rd chapter, beginning with the weekly Sabbath, the 7th day, beginning with the Passover, feast of unleavened bread, the feast of weeks, trumpets, atonement, tabernacles. Those are the atonement. Those are the days. So he says again, let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of an holy day or the new moon or the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come. These are the days that are outlined in the Bible that he's referring to, but I was in a religion, in a spiritual system that I thought I was following God. I thought it was about God, but they're not doing any of these days. But they got some different days they come with. They got some different customs that they come with, some different traditions that they present unto you as an adherent to that particular faith. And it's totally contrary to what thus said the Lord. And again, Halloween is no different. And when you look, they've even tried to we'll look at the history of them trying to Christianize Halloween. But when you look at the origins of this day, it's very wicked. So now what I want to do is I want to look at the history of this day. We're going to go into the pagan origins of Christian holidays. And this is the chapter 9. And it's entitled Halloween, the Celtic New Year, Samhain. It says on page 52, Halloween is an annual holiday that is celebrated in many Western countries on October 31st. So that's the day. On this day, children dress up in costumes and treat from house to house. Adults attend costume parties, make jack-o'-lanterns, visit haunted houses, have seances, and tell scary stories. I look forward to all of this. Even going to Catholic school, that was a big thing. Not realizing that I was dealing in paganism. Many Christians ignore the obvious ungodly customs of Halloween. Halloween evolved from the Celtic New Year, Samhain. Now it's spelled Samhain, but it's pronounced Samhain. The Celts lived approximately 2,000 years ago in what is now Great Britain, Ireland, and France, which was called Gaul back then. To Celts, Samhain was the day the life of the sun ceased, thus causing summer to end. And if you looking at our area, you look outside today, its spiritual world was the most thin. And that souls were released from the land of the dead. See, this is a day about the dead. This isn't about God. This is about the dead. It says Druid priests set sacred bonfires on hilltops and sacrifice plants, animals, and humans to the Gaelic deities. So now you got human sacrifice, you got sacrifice unto these false gods, you got a day dedicated to the dead. But let's find out something about the true and living God. This is John, the 4th chapter, and verse, we're going to pick it up at John, the 4th chapter, and verse 24. It says, God is a spirit, And they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. See, what they were doing was dealing with worship, but it was false worship. Let's go to Mark, the 12th chapter, because it said it's a day dedicated to the dead. It says it was the day when they felt that the physical and the spiritual world, the veil between the two was most thin, and that the souls were in the land of the dead. But let's see something about the true and living God. It says in Mark, the gospel according to Mark, chapter 12 and verse 26, and it says, as touching the dead, they rise, have ye not read in the book of Moses, how in the bush God spake unto him, saying, I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. Now he's talking to the Sadducees who say there's no resurrection of the dead, and they give this scenario of a woman who was married to a man, and the man dies having no seed, and the Levirate law is fulfilled, or the duty of brothers is fulfilled, and they asked in the resurrection, whose wife is she? Okay, so he had to tell them something. He says, and as touching the dead that they rise, have ye not read in the book of Moses, how in the bush God spake unto him, saying, I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. Then he says something which is key. He said, he is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. Yea, therefore ye do greatly err. Therefore do greatly err. Ye greatly err in your position. And people today greatly err when they dealing in this falsehood. So going back to this book, The Pagan Origins of Christian Holidays, it says, Celtic households relit their hearths from the flames of the bonfires. These fires were used to scare away any unwanted spirits. One popular belief was that the dead who had been offended by the living would return to destroy crops or bring about other misfortunes. During this day, the Celts also wore costumes and engaged in dances that were symbolic of the cycles of life and death. Many dressed in animal costumes to signify the release of the souls that resided in animals. Masks made of animal heads were adorned to hide from the trickery of feared deities. The priest also attempted to communicate with the dead and prognosticated using the remains of sacrificed animals. So now they dealing in necromancy. Let's go to Exodus. Well, actually, let's go to Exodus. Because this is a day about the dead. Exodus, the 22nd chapter, we want to pick it up at verse 18. Or actually, hold on one second. Exodus 22. And we want to pick it up at verse 18. Okay, so now it said the Druids, just to point that out, these are priests. These are people who are dealing in sorcery. Okay, so in Exodus, the 22nd chapter, in the 18th verse, it tells us clearly, it says, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. What does it mean, suffer? Allow a witch to live. And that's what they're dealing in. They're dealing in sorcery. Leviticus, the 20th chapter. See, one thing the Torah tells you what you shouldn't do, and the people were commanded not to engage in this type of thing. They were told that they had to be holy. It says in verse 27, Leviticus 20 and 27, a man also, a woman that hath a familiar spirit. And see, when people are talking about they're dealing with the dead, like the witch of Endor, when you read about it concerning Samuel, that woman had a familiar spirit. But then it says she was communicating with Samuel. That's who she was communicating with. The spirit, Samuel, the prophet, was dead. We know the dead don't know anything. They're not talking. They love it. They envy. Their hatred is now perished. They're not communicating with you. What she was dealing with was an evil spirit. She was dealing with Satan's minion. So it said a man, also a woman that had the familiar spirit. I've met somebody who had a familiar spirit. And I've seen this person with my own eyes prognosticate about things that were to take place. I've seen this same person peep and mutter. But in my ignorance, in my youth, I didn't know what was going on, but I surely saw it. What was she dealing with? She even said, I have a spirit that I'm dealing with. She said that. But it wasn't the spirit of God. A man also, a woman that hath a familiar spirit, or that is a wizard, shall surely be put to death. They shall stone them with stones. Their blood shall be upon them. That was something that was not allowed. Deuteronomy, the 18th chapter. Deuteronomy, the 18th chapter. And we could pick it up. Let's see. Deuteronomy, the 18th chapter. And we're going to pick it up at verse 9. It says, because we had to be different from the other nations. And when I say we, I'm talking about the children of Israel, who are black people that have been scattered into slavery all over this world. Deuteronomy 18 chapter verse 9, it says, when thou art come into the land. And one thing about it, let me say this, we are some of the biggest engagers in this foolishness. We are entrenched in the foolishness and the darkness, the spiritual wickedness of these other nations. We take upon their customs wholesale when we were supposed to be the standard by which other nations should look to for righteousness. We have abandoned our God, abandoned our faith system, abandoned the Torah that he gave us for some foolishness, for some jack-o'-lanterns, for some Easter eggs, for some damn Christmas trees. Deuteronomy 18 and verse 9, it said, when thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not learn to do after the abominations of those nations. What the other nations are doing here and abroad, they are abominable in the eyes of the Most High. There shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire. They were sacrificing their children to this god Molech. Even Israel got engaged in that foolishness. You even see again sacrifice associated with this day unto this day. But nevertheless, it says, just I want to point this out, it says, Jewish priests set sacred bonfires on hilltops and sacrificed plants, animals, and humans to the Gaelic deities. So it might not have been Molech, but they were dealing in human sacrifice. It says, there shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that uses divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch. But you see, that's what people are doing. We read about seances. We read about them in the days of old trying to communicate with the dead. People do it today with Ouija boards, or a charmer, or a consultant with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or what? It says, or a necromancer. What's a necromancer? Let's go to, real quick. This is a book called The Fortune Telling Book, the Encyclopedia of Divination and Soothsaying. It says, necromancy is the art of revealing future events by means of communication with the dead. That's what necromancy is. And it goes on to tell you where it comes from. The word necromancy comes from the Greek necros, meaning dead body, and mantia, meaning divination. And in some instances, they would even use literal bodies to deal, dead bodies or corpses to deal with necromancy. But let's move on. Let's go back to this book, The Pagan Origins of Christian Holidays. It said, during this day, the Celts wore costumes and engaged in dances that were symbolic of the cycles of life and death. Many dressed in animal costumes to signify the release of the souls that resided in animals. I read this. I'm going to skip down a little bit. Because they were prognosticating using the remains of sacrificed animals. You've seen the entrails of, I believe it's Julius Caesar with it. You see the entrails used in that story to prognosticate. That's something that they do throughout various cultures. Some even use bones. They do different things to tell the future. By 43 AD, the Romans conquered the Celts, and two autumn festivals of the Romans, Feralia and Pomana's Day, were intermingled with the Celtic feast. So now we go understand how we got to Halloween. Feralia was observed on February 21st. This day signified the end of Perenchilia, a 9-day feast for the dead. Again, this is about the dead, but he's not a god of the living. He's a god of the dead. He's a god of the living. He's not the god of the dead. It said during the feast of Perenchilia, the Romans made offerings in honor of their deceased family members. At midnight on the Feralia, the heads of each household would speak to the evil spirits and ancestors to ensure their return to the spirit world. This is all foolishness, though. If this was done on February 22nd, the Eucharistia feast was held. On this day, families feasted together and offered food and incense in honor of lyrics. Also on this day, any family quarrels were forgotten. On November 1st, the festival of the fertility goddess Pomona was celebrated. So that's November 1st. It says Pomona was the goddess of fruit and trees and was often depicted with apples. You'll see her oftentimes. She has these apples. It says on page 53, this is probably how apples became associated with Halloween. Over time, apples were used to divine concerning marriage. You've seen people bobbing for apples. It says, when the apple is cut in half, the seeds form a type of pentagram, a symbol that represented fertility to the Celts. Thus, it is quite natural that the apple could be used in their divination. This is most likely where the custom of bobbing or ducking for apples derived. During this time, young unmarried people would bob for apples. The first one to bite into an apple would be the first to marry. The divination of the time and fertility of Pomona were combined in the spirit of the Samhain festival. Now that's what they were doing. Now, eventually you had the rise of Catholicism. After the emergence of Christianity, Samhain was still observed. Even during that time, they were still dealing in this paganism. And what did the Catholic Church do? In order to bring the pagans into their fold, they adopted their customs and put Christian stamps on, Christianized these things. But you can't worship God according to a lie. God is a spirit. God wasn't in this. This is all wicked. So it says to supplant Samhain, Pope Boniface IV designated May 13th as All Saints Day in honor of the dead saints. However, this was not sufficient to completely thwart. I just said it was Samhain. Why you put that up here? It says, however, this was not sufficient to completely thwart the deeply entrenched Samhain festival. So in 835, it's sour, all right. We're going to remove that too. Potato, tomato. It don't matter. It's all foolishness. It's all some paganism. It's all contrary to what thus said the Lord. I respect not the pronunciation. However, this was not sufficient to completely thwart the deeply entrenched Samhain festival. So in 835, Pope Gregory, the fourth, transferred All Saints Day to November 1st. Samhain, which was celebrated the night before, eventually was called All Hallows Eve and later became Halloween. In 1000 AD, the Catholic Church established November 2nd, All Souls Day, to honor the dead who were not considered saints. Where am I at? On All Souls Day, it was common for the poor to go a-souling. This consisted of going door to door and requesting simple pastries. Now we're seeing something that's likened to trick or treat. So they would go from door to door and exchange the poor, and they asked for pastries. In exchange, the poor would pray for the souls of home dwellers, dead relatives that were in purgatory. But we know there is no purgatory. We know there is no purgatory. But the Catholics believe in purgatory. Many believe that this is the origin of trick or treating. One thing I'm happy about, I don't have to use. I put a sign on my door saying we don't observe no candy. We don't observe trick or pagan holidays like Halloween. But because there's so much snow outside, they probably not around here. They probably don't want to get snowed on. Making jack-o'-lanterns originated from Irish folklore. One common myth was that there was a drunkard named Stingy Jack. Jack had an infamous reputation for his silver tongue and evil deeds. According to one version of the tale, Jack was able to trick the devil into climbing a tree. He then placed a cross on the tree, which prevented the devil from climbing down. Jack made a deal with the devil that he would let him down if he would never take his soul. The devil agreed and Jack removed the cross. When Jack died, he was prevented from entering heaven and also barred from hell. That's the story, because we understand through the scriptures, through the Bible, the New Testament writings, that no man hath ascended up to heaven. I talked about that yesterday. Jesus said, "Without go, ye cannot come." This is all some foolishness. And the idea that you're going to descend into hell, that's not biblical in the sense of you going down somewhere. This is what we think, but that's not biblical. Rather, it's going to be a lake of fire right here on the earth. And when he returns is when it's established. And the first one to be cast into the lake of fire are the beast and the false prophet. 1,000 years later, Satan is cast into the lake of fire with a beast and a false prophet are. And in that 1,000-year period, when people go up and worship the Lord in righteousness and observe the feast days of the Lord, who are they going to see when they go up? They're going to see the ones who transgressed against him. They're going to look at the abominable situation where the worm dies not and the fire is not quenched. That's what they're going to see when they go up there. And understand, that's where you headed if you don't abandon this falsehood. I'm talking specifically if you engage in this type of worship. Because there's people that straight up, they see a lot of people are they don't know the esoteric, they are unlearned, they just doing something. It's some other people that are dealing with straight up sorcery and Luciferianism and witchcraft. So it says when Jack died, he was prevented from entering into heaven and also barred from hell. Jack had no light to see his way. Mockingly, the devil gave Jack an ember, that's a little flame, that he had been lit with one of the everlasting flames of hell. Jack carved out the inside of a turnip and placed the ember inside of it. He was known as Jack of the Lantern or Jack-o'-lantern. Notice what lantern is. A lantern is a light. So he made a lantern out of a turnip. When the Irish migrated to America, they brought this custom of making jack-o'-lanterns with them. See, that's where that comes from. However, in America, pumpkins were more available and replaced the turnip. And my brother came to visit Leo. He said some people, they were trying to get him some pumpkins. He came to the point on the porch. He said, "Well, all these pumpkins, where these pumpkins come from?" Because he lives in a somewhat rural area. But you got to think, those people out there, they certainly making jack-o'-lanterns and not my brother Leo, but the other people around him are certainly making jack-o'-lanterns because that's their time. But before they were making jack-o'-lanterns out of pumpkins, they were making jack-o'-lanterns out of turnips. See, we should know we just do stuff. I can remember growing up making jack-o'-lanterns. I had no concept. Maybe I said, where did this come from? This is not only is this spiritually abominable, it's culturally retarded. I'm not a Celtic. I'm not Irish. I'm not from Europe. Why the hell would I be making some jack-o'-lanterns? Why in the world would I be dealing in this foolishness? The customs that have been associated with Halloween, such as witchcraft and sorcery, demonstrate that this holiday is antithetical to the word of God. As a matter of fact, Halloween is considered a high day among those who follow the wicked religion. See, so again, it's a day dealing in sorcery. And one thing about it, and this is my last place, go to Matthew 15 chapter. You cannot even just say, well, I'm going to change and I'm going to twist and I'm going to make it Christian. Like you got these silly Negroes running around here making you change the word of God. He tells you what's going to happen when you change the word of God. He said, we'll pick it up at verse 9, Matthew 15 and 9. He says, but in vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. And that's the pagan origins of Christian holidays. I thank you for your time.